Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in 2 Samuel chapter 14 verse 1 through chapter 15 verse 22. Now Joab, son of Zeruiah, realized that the king longed to see Absalom. So Joab sent to Tekoa and brought from there a wise woman. He told her, "Pretend to be in mourning and put on garments for mourning. Don't anoint yourself with oil. Instead, act like a woman who has been mourning for the dead for some time. Go to the king and speak to him in the following fashion." Then Joab told her what to say. So the Tekoan woman went to the king. She bowed down with her face to the ground in deference to him and said, "Please help me, O king." The king replied to her, "What do you want?" She answered, "I am a widow. My husband is dead. Your servant has 2 sons. When the 2 of them got into a fight in the field, there was no one present who could intervene. One of them struck the other and killed him. Now the entire family has risen up against your servant, saying, 'Turn over the one who struck down his brother, so that we can execute him and avenge the death of his brother, whom he killed. In so doing, we will also destroy the heir.' They want to extinguish my remaining coal, leaving no one on the face of the earth to carry on the name of my husband." Then the king told the woman, "Go to your home. I will give instructions concerning your situation." The Tekoan woman said to the king, "My lord the king, let any blame fall on me and on the house of my father, but let the king and his throne be innocent." The king said, "Bring to me whoever speaks to you, and he won't bother you again." She replied, "In that case, let the king invoke the name of the Lord your God, so that the avenger of blood may not kill. Then they will not destroy my son." He replied, "As surely as the Lord lives, not a single hair of your son's head will fall to the ground." Then the woman said, "Please permit your servant to speak to my lord the king about another matter." He replied, "Tell me." The woman said, "Why have you devised something like this against God's people? When the king speaks in this fashion, he makes himself guilty. For the king has not brought back the one he has banished. Certainly we must die, and are like water spilled on the ground, that cannot be gathered up again. But God does not take away life. Instead, he devises ways for the banished to be restored. I have now come to speak with my lord the king about this matter, because the people have made me fearful." But your servant said, "I will speak to the king. Perhaps the king will do what his female servant asks." Yes, the king may listen and deliver his female servant from the hand of the man who seeks to remove both me and my son from the inheritance God has given us. So your servant said, "May the word of my lord the king be my security, for my lord the king is like the angel of God when it comes to deciding between right and wrong. May the Lord your God be with you." Then the king replied to the woman, "Don't hide any information from me when I question you." The woman said, "Let my lord the king speak." The king said, "Did Joab put you up to all this?" The woman answered, "As surely as you live, my lord the king, there is no deviation to the right or to the left from all that my lord the king has said, for your servant Joab gave me instructions. He has put all these words in your servant's mouth. Your servant Joab did this so as to change this situation. But my lord has wisdom like that of the angel of God, and knows everything that is happening in the land." Then the king said to Joab, "All right, I will do this thing. Go and bring back the young man Absalom." Then Joab bowed down with his face toward the ground and thanked the king. Joab said, "Today your servant knows that I have found favor in your sight, my lord the king, because the king has granted the request of your servant." So Joab got up and went to Geshur and brought Absalom back to Jerusalem. But the king said, "Let him go over to his own house. He may not see my face." So Absalom went over to his own house. He did not see the king's face. Now, in all Israel, everyone acknowledged that there was no man as handsome as Absalom. From the sole of his feet to the top of his head, he was perfect in appearance. When he would shave his head, at the end of every year, he used to shave his head, for it grew too long, and he would shave it. He used to weigh the hair of his head at 3 pounds, according to the king's weight. Absalom had 3 sons and 1 daughter, whose name was Tamar. She was a very attractive woman. Absalom lived in Jerusalem for 2 years without seeing the king's face. Then Absalom sent a message to Joab, asking him to send him to the king, but Joab was not willing to come to him. So he sent a second message to him, but he was still not willing to come. So he said to his servants, Look, Joab has a portion of field adjacent to mine, and he has some barley there. Go and set it on fire. So Absalom's servants set Joab's portion of the field on fire. Then Joab got up and came to Absalom's house. He said to him, Why did your servants set my portion of the field on fire? Absalom said to Joab, Look, I sent a message to you, saying, Come here so that I can send you to the king with this message. Why have I come from Geshur? It would be better for me if I were still there. Let me now see the face of the king. If I am at fault, let him put me to death. So Joab went to the king and informed him. The king summoned Absalom, and he came to the king. Absalom bowed down before the king with his face toward the ground, and the king kissed him. Some time later, Absalom managed to acquire a chariot and horses, as well as 50 men to serve as his royal guard. Now Absalom used to get up early and stand beside the road that led to the city gate. Whenever anyone came by who had a complaint to bring to the king for arbitration, Absalom would call out to him, What city are you from? The person would answer, I, your servant, am from one of the tribes of Israel. Absalom would then say to him, Look, your claims are legitimate and appropriate, but there is no representative of the king who will listen to you. Absalom would then say, If only they would make me a judge in the land, then everyone who had a judicial complaint could come to me, and I would make sure he receives a just settlement. When someone approached to bow before him, Absalom would extend his hand and embrace him and kiss him. Absalom acted this way toward everyone in Israel who came to the king for justice. In this way, Absalom won the loyalty of the citizens of Israel. After 4 years, Absalom said to the king, Let me go and repay my vow that I made to the Lord while I was in Hebron. For I made this vow when I was living in Geshur in Aram. If the Lord really does allow me to return to Jerusalem, I will serve the Lord. The king replied to him, Go in peace. So Absalom got up and went to Hebron. Then Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, who said, When you hear the sound of the horn, you may assume that Absalom rules in Hebron. Now 200 men had gone with Absalom from Jerusalem. Since they were invited, they went naively and were unaware of what Absalom was planning. While he was offering sacrifices, Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's advisor, to come from his city, Gilo. The conspiracy was gaining momentum, and the people were starting to side with Absalom. Then a messenger came to David and reported, The men of Israel are loyal to Absalom. So David said to all his servants who were with him in Jerusalem, Come on, let's escape. Otherwise no one will be delivered from Absalom. Go immediately, or else he will quickly overtake us and bring disaster on us and kill the city's residents with the sword. The king's servants replied to the king, We will do whatever our lord the king decides. So the king and all the members of his royal court set out on foot, though the king left behind 10 concubines to attend to the palace. The king and all the people set out on foot, pausing at a spot some distance away. All his servants were leaving with him, along with all the Kerethites, all the Pelethites, and all the Gittites, some 600 men who had come on foot from Gath. They were leaving with the king. When the king said to Ittai the Gittite, Why should you come with us? Go back and stay with the new king, for you are a foreigner and an exile from your own country. It seems like you arrived just yesterday. Today, should I make you wander around by going with us? I go where I must go. But as for you, go back and take your men with you. May genuine loyal love protect you. But Ittai replied to the king, As surely as the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king is, whether dead or alive, there I will be as well. So David said to Ittai, Come along then. So Ittai the Gittite went along, accompanied by all his men and all the dependents who were with him. Yeah. So, following the slaying of his brother, Amnon, David's son Absalom goes into hiding. And Absalom was, Amnon had slept with his sister Tamar, and then you had Absalom executing judgment against Amnon at a royal feast, where all of his servants rose up and killed Amnon. And then, subsequent to that, Absalom goes into exile, and the king did nothing about all of this other than to be angry at Amnon and grieved over Absalom. And that's how 2 Samuel 14 starts out here. Joab, son of Zeruiah, realized that the king longed to see Absalom. So Joab has this plot where he brings in this widow who has the story of her two sons and her dead husband. And one of the sons kills the others. One of the sons kills the other son. And people are talking to her saying, come on, let's punish the son and remove the last heir that she has. And the king says, as surely as the Lord lives, not a hair of his head will fall to the ground. And she's like, well, if you're going to say that, then what about your son that you've exiled from the land? You going to do anything about him? And he says, Joab put you up to this, didn't he? And she says, yeah. So he brings Absalom back in accordance with Joab and his wishes. But nevertheless, he doesn't go and see Absalom at all, despite this, for a period of 2 years. And Absalom wants to see the king, but, well, Absalom wants to see Joab anyway. But, well, yeah, he wants to see the king. And he's trying to get an audience through Joab, and Joab happens to have a field next to him, and he burns the field down in an attempt to get Joab's attention, which he does. And the king and Absalom are reunited. But not all is good, because later on, Absalom gathers for himself 50 men to serve as his royal guard, and he runs around in a chariot like a king. And he stations himself at the gate to the city, saying, oh, nobody can hear you. Looking for anybody who has a judicial case that they need brought before the king. And he stirs up contempt by saying that none of the king's officials can see you and deal any justice to you, but only if I were the king or judge, I would dispense justice for you. And he gained the hearts of a lot of Israel that way. And then, essentially, you have Absalom seizing the throne from Hebron, and David and his entourage fleeing the land, along with a few resident foreigners who were with him at the time. Yeah, so what's Guzik got to say here? Joab the son of Zeruiah perceived that the king's heart was concerned about Absalom. David was obviously troubled by his estranged relationship with Absalom. Joab, David's chief general, perceived this and decided to do something to bring David and Absalom back together. In the case of Absalom and the king, the relationship remained virtually deadlocked, neither side having the spiritual incentive to break it. From Baldwin. We know that Joab was fiercely loyal to David, and he may have done this to protect David. Joab figured that it was dangerous to have Absalom stewing away in a distant country, and felt that the safest thing to do was to bring about reconciliation between father and son. Joab sent to Tekoa and brought from there a wise woman. Joab decided to soften David's heart toward Absalom by bringing a widow before him with a similar story of estrangement from her son. Help, O king. In ancient Israel, those who felt their local judges didn't treat them fairly had access to the court of the king himself. Deliver him who struck his brother, that we may execute him for the life of his brother whom he killed." The woman of Tekoa referred to the custom of the Avenger of Blood. The Avenger of Blood had the responsibility of avenging the death of a member of the family. The cities of refuge mentioned in Numbers 35, 9 through 34, were meant to protect someone guilty of manslaughter from being killed by an Avenger of Blood before the case could be heard properly. "As the Lord lives, not one hair of your son shall fall to the ground." This was what the woman, and Joab behind her, waited to hear. In saying this, David ignored the cause of justice for the sake of family sympathy and loyalty. In personal relationships, it is a good and glorious thing to be generous with forgiveness and mercy when we are wronged. But David had a responsibility as the king and chief judge of Israel, and when he was sorely tempted to neglect that responsibility, he did neglect it. He guaranteed safety at the expense of justice, and immediately the far-sighted woman captured him in her trap from Redpath. Several factors made this woman's appeal successful. She was a widow, which would invite sympathy. She lived at some distance from Jerusalem, which made it difficult to easily know or inquire of the facts of her case. She was old, which gave more dignity to her story. She wore the clothes of mourning to heighten the effect. She brought a case of family estrangement to David, and she brought a case that was not too similar, lest it arouse David's suspicions. Yeah. I can't remember, in this widow's case, in the case of the cities of refuge, they were for one who committed manslaughter unintentionally. But in the case of this widow, she says, "The two fought with each other in the field, and there was no one to part them, but the one struck the other and killed him." So, yeah, it sounds like a case of murder, of having enmity in the heart for the one and killing him. So, rather than dealing with it justly, David chooses to ignore the circumstances of it because of the sweetness of the plea, I suppose. And so with the rape of his daughter Tamar and the subsequent murder of his son Amnon. And, yeah. The king does not bring his banished one home again. The woman of Tekoa spoke boldly to David, confronting his sin of not initiating reconciliation with Absalom. Because he was estranged from David and growing more and more bitter, Absalom was a threat to Israel, and David allowed it. Why then have you schemed such a thing against the people of God? David had some responsibility to initiate reconciliation. If David approached Absalom, he might be rejected, but he still had the responsibility to try. Yet as king and chief judge of Israel, he also had a responsibility to both initiate reconciliation and do it the right way. David will not succeed in this. He is willing to pardon the meanest of his subjects, the murder of a brother at the instance of a poor widow, and he is not willing to pardon his son Absalom, whose restoration to favor is the desire of the whole nation. From Clark. We will surely die and become like water spilled on the ground. The woman of Tekoa wisely spoke to David about the urgency of reconciliation. David, we all die, and then the opportunity for reconciliation is over. Do it now. But he devises means, so that his banished ones are not expelled from him. The woman of Tekoa meant, find a way to do it, David. God finds a way to bring us back to himself. It is true that God finds a way, but not at the expense of justice. God reconciles us by satisfying justice, not by ignoring justice. This is one of the best gospel texts in the Old Testament. If we are under the chastening of God, we may feel like banished ones, yet we can put our place of being banished, his banished ones, belonging to him and trusting him to bring us back to him. Yeah, ultimately, if we are banished, God figures out a way to bring us back. God has devised a way to bring the banished back to him, that they might not be expelled from him. The way is through the person and work of Jesus, and how he stood in the place of guilty sinners as he hung on the cross and received the punishment that we deserved. Yeah. Yeah. I still feel like Absalom should probably have something said to him or done to him regarding the slaying of his brother Amnon. Is the hand of Joab with you in all this? David somehow knew that a plan this subtle had to come from the hand of Joab. He put all these words in the mouth of your maidservant. Joab orchestrated this with precision. He knew exactly what strings to pull in David. Joab was loyal to David, but it was not a selfless loyalty. Bring back the young man Absalom. Joab got what he wanted, and what he thought was best for the nation of Israel. He hoped that Absalom's reconciliation with David would prevent a rebellion. Let him return to his own house, but do not let him see my face. David was overindulgent with his sons in the past, as when he got angry but did nothing against Amnon. Now David is too harsh with Absalom, refusing to see him after he had been exiled in Geshur for 3 years. When parents don't discipline properly from the beginning, they tend to overcompensate in the name of toughness. This often provokes the children to wrath and makes the parent-child relationship worse. In all Israel, there was no one who was praised as much as Absalom for his good looks. This begins to explain why Absalom was popular in Israel. Israel was attracted to King Saul because he was a very good-looking man. Absalom was also a man of political destiny. He was the third son of David. The firstborn Amnon was gone, and we hear nothing more of Chileab, the secondborn. It is likely that Absalom was the crown prince, next in line for the throne. He weighed the hair of his head at 200 shekels. Absalom had such a great head of hair that he cut 5½ pounds of hair off his head every year. He was extremely proud of his long hair, and he lost his life because of it from Redpath. When he was going through the forest, he got hung up in the trees by it. One daughter, whose name was Tamar. Absalom was a man of deep and sympathetic feeling. He memorialized his wronged sister Tamar by naming a daughter after her. Absalom dwelt 2 full years in Jerusalem, but did not see the king's face. During these 2 years, we can imagine that Absalom grew more and more bitter against David. He was reconciled, but only partially. David offered only a partial, incomplete reconciliation. Absalom was banished from Israel because he murdered his brother Amnon. Yet Absalom felt entirely justified in killing the man who raped his sister. His sense of justification made the bitterness against David more intense. Joab's field is near mine, and he has barley there. Go and set it on fire. Frustrated that he could not see his father, Absalom burnt Joab's fields to get his attention. This showed how brutal and amoral Absalom was. It's hard to think of a greater contrast than that between Absalom and the prodigal son of Jesse's parable. The prodigal son came back humble and repentant. Absalom came back burning Joab's fields. At the same time, sometimes God gets our attention by setting our barley field on fire. He, knowing that we will not come by any other means, sendeth a serious trial. He sets our barley field on fire, which he has a right to do, seeing our barley fields are far more his than they are ours. From Spurgeon. If there is any iniquity in me, let him execute me. This statement reflects Absalom's sense that he was fully justified in what he did. So Joab went to the king and told him. As brutal and amoral as Absalom was, it worked. Burning Joab's fields got his attention and made Joab intercede on Absalom's behalf. He came to the king and bowed himself on his face to the ground. Absalom outwardly submitted to David, but David's 2-year refusal to reconcile left a legacy of bitterness in Absalom that turned out badly for David, for Absalom, and for Israel. Then the king kissed Absalom. David offered Absalom forgiveness without any repentance or resolution of the wrong. In personal relationships, it is often a sign of love and graciousness to overlook a wrong. Proverbs 10:12 says, "Hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all sins." But as king of Israel, this was more than a personal matter with David. He was the chief judge of Israel, and David excused and overlooked Absalom's obvious crimes. From trap here, he should have kicked him, rather, and not have hardened him to further villainy. From red path, David's forgiveness of Absalom was completely inadequate, leading to a further outbreak of sin. God's forgiveness of a man's soul is completely adequate, and a great deterrent to continued sin. Red path, may God write it on your soul. If the pardon you want is that God should wink at your sin, he will not do it. Yeah. It's interesting, too, that Absalom hits on the very thing that David is screwing up here. That is justice. In his case, and in Amnon's case, there was no, and in Tamar's case, I suppose, there was no justice done. Rather, the king ignored the situation and let everything play out without any hand of intercession in it at all. Absalom rightly identifies this deficiency in the kingdom and puts himself in as the solution. Chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. This means that Absalom did not want the chariot for speed, but to make an impressive procession. Yeah, if you have 50 men running before the chariots, it's going to slow it all down. This was Absalom the politician, sensing what the people wanted and knowing how to give them the image of it. Samuel, who anointed Absalom's father, never went around with horses and chariots and an entourage. Samuel traveled on foot, and as a man, Absalom wasn't worthy to be mentioned in the same breath as Samuel. Whenever anyone had a lawsuit to come to the king for a decision, ancient kings were more than the heads of government. They were also the supreme court of their kingdom. If someone believed that a local court did not give them justice, they then appealed to the court of the king, where the king or a representative of the king heard their case. Your case is good and right, but there is no deputy of the king to hear you. Absalom stirred up dissatisfaction with David's government and campaigned against David by promising to provide justice that David supposedly denied the people. "Oh, that I were made judge in the land, I would give him justice." Absalom had reason to be disillusioned with David's administration of justice. When Amnon raped Tamar, David did nothing. When Absalom did something about it, David banished Absalom and kept him at a distance even when he came back. Whenever anyone came near to bow down to him, that he would put out his hand and take him and kiss him. Absalom was skilled at projecting a man of the people image. In an obvious display, he wouldn't let others bow down to him, but would lift them up, shake their hand, and embrace them. From what we know of Absalom, we can guess that he really didn't consider himself a man of the people at all. He regularly acted as if he was above others, and the laws that applied to others didn't apply to him. He knew he was better looking, better connected, better off, and had better political instincts than most anyone. But these political instincts made Absalom know that he had to create the image of a man of the people. In ancient Israel, they were too easily impressed by image and too slow to see or appreciate the reality behind the image. Since the days of ancient Israel, we have only become more impressed by image over reality. Absalom appeared to be the real and was the undisputed heir to the throne. David could not, in the course of nature, live very long, and most people are more disposed to hail the beams of the rising than exult in those of the setting sun, from Clark. Yeah. Got the new hotness coming up, the new king ascending to the throne now. Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. Absalom's cunning campaign worked. He became more popular and more trusted than David. Absalom knew exactly how to do this. He carefully cultivated an exciting, enticing image, chariots and horses, and 50 men to run before him. He worked hard. Absalom would rise early. He knew where to position himself, beside the way to the gate. He looked for troubled people, anyone who had a lawsuit. He reached out to troubled people. Absalom would call to him. He took a personal interest in the troubled person. What city are you from? He sympathized with the person. Your case is good and right. He never attacked David directly. No deputy of the king to hear you. He left the troubled person more troubled. No deputy of the king to hear you. And without directly attacking David, Absalom promised to do better. Oh, that I were made judge in the land, and everyone who has any suit or case would come to me. Then I would give him justice. Yeah, it's interesting. He undersells what he's aiming for. He's aiming for a judgeship. He wants to be the judge in the land. But that position is for the king. In ancient Israel, anyway. Absalom's clever approach made him able to subvert and divide David's kingdom without saying anything specific that could condemn him. If someone objected, Absalom would simply say, "Tell me one specific thing that I have said or done." In fact, Absalom could do this all day and say, "I'm helping David to deal with all this discontent," while Absalom was in fact promoting discontent. David was Israel's greatest king, and Israel became dissatisfied with him and let a wicked, amoral man steal their hearts. There are many reasons why this happened. David was getting older. His sins diminished his standing. People liked change, and Absalom was exciting. Absalom was very skilled and cunning, and David had to enter into the fellowship of his sufferings and be rejected like the son of David would later be rejected. Interesting. Yeah, but it's not as though Absalom has proved himself like David has as a king. In that David has gone out and fought battles for the people, and I think mostly, if not entirely, thrown off the yoke of submission to the Philistines. So it's interesting that Absalom can bring this sort of peacetime complaint against the king that he's not judging very well. It shows that, in general, there's been peace. From Clark here. Behold a king, the greatest that ever lived, a profound politician, an able general, a brave soldier, a poet of the most sublime genius and character, a prophet of the Most High God, and the deliverer of his country, driven from his dominions by his own son, abandoned by his fickle people. Yeah, certainly a picture of Christ in that he came to those who were his own, but his own didn't recognize him, type thing. We might say that Absalom's greatest sin was impatience. Absalom seemed to stand nearest to the throne, but his sin was that he sought it during his father's life and endeavored to dethrone him in order to sit in his stead. After 40 years, this perhaps was Absalom's age at the time, but some believe that this is a minor corruption of the text and that it should read 4 years, based on the readings in Syriac and Arabic translations, Josephus, and some Hebrew manuscripts. Let me go to Hebron and pay the vow which I made to the Lord. Absalom committed treason under the guise of worship. He knew that the appearance of spirituality could work in his favor. It is possible, perhaps likely, that Absalom did all this feeling spiritual and in God's will. Men in Absalom's place often deceive themselves with words like this: "Lord, you know we need new leadership. Thank you for raising me up for such a time as this. Guide me and bless me, O Lord, as I endeavor to do what is best for your people." Divisive people almost never see themselves as divisive. They see themselves as crusaders for God's righteous cause, and often believe or hope God's hand is upon them. This is especially a problem when will only believe a person is divisive if they were to admit they are divisive. Go in peace. Ironically, these were David's last words to Absalom. Upon hearing these, Absalom went to carry on the plot to overthrow David's kingdom. Absalom reigns in Hebron. Absalom counted on the hope that most of Israel would see this as succession and not treason. With Absalom went 200 men, invited from Jerusalem. Absalom wisely knew that he needed others to endorse, or to at least appear to endorse, his government. He counted on these 200 men, who were not against David, to at least be silent, and therefore give the impression that they were for Absalom. When the innocent and unknowing are among the divisive, their silence is always received as agreement. Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor. Absalom's government gained more prestige when one of David's top aides defected to his side. This genuinely hurt David. He described his feelings in Psalm 41. Even my own familiar friend in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted up his heel against me. Ahithophel was renowned for his wisdom and wise counsel. Even wise men can take their side with divisive and destructive leaders. In Ahithophel's case, it was probably prompted by a sense of personal hurt and bitterness because of what David did to Ahithophel's granddaughter Bathsheba. While he offered sacrifices, Absalom was careful to keep up his religious practices, both for the sake of image and because he was deceived enough to think that God wanted to bless him. And the conspiracy grew strong. Once some started coming to Absalom's side, it encouraged more and more to come. Momentum for division builds because others are doing it. Arise and let us flee, or we shall not escape from Absalom. David knew well that Absalom was a ruthless man who valued power over principle. He didn't want the city of Jerusalem to become a battleground, strike the city with the edge of the sword, so he fled the city. The kings, the king, the king. The writer here wanted to emphasize that David was the king, despite Absalom's treachery. The king left 10 women, concubines, to keep the house. David thought, and had reason to think, that these 10 women could be safely left behind. He felt he needed someone to look after the house. Sadly, this also tells us that David had at least 10 concubines. A concubine was essentially a legal mistress. In addition to David's many wives, this shows that David was a man who sometimes indulged his passions instead of restraining them in a godly way. All the Cherethites, all the Pelethites. These men comprised David's personal bodyguard. The Gittites faithfully followed him from the time he lived among the Philistines. These men, who were faithful to David before he became successful, also stuck with him when his success seemed to fade away. It is remarkable that in this defining moment of his latter reign, foreigners rallied around David. It is more remarkable and tragic that his own countrymen and his own family were nowhere to be found. It also reminds me of the Messiah as well, who attracts foreigners around him. Passed before the king. As David watched this procession leave Jerusalem and head for safety, he was greatly pained. This was reflected in the psalm that David wrote during this time. In Psalm 55, 4-8, it says, "My heart is severely pained within me, and the terrors of death have fallen upon me. Fearfulness and trembling have come upon me, and horror has overwhelmed me. And I said, Oh, that I had wings like a dove, for then I would fly away and be at rest. Indeed, I would wander far off and remain in the wilderness. I would hasten my escape from the windy storm and tempest." David put his trust in God. From Psalm 3, God, Lord, how they have increased who trouble me. Many are those who rise up against me. Many are they who say of me, There is no help for him in God. But you, O Lord, are a shield for me, my glory and the one who lifts up my head. I cried to the Lord with my voice, and he heard me from his holy hill. I lay down and slept. I woke, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me all around. Psalm 41, 61, 62, and 63 were also written during this period. Why are you also going with us? As David watched the procession of his faithful supporters, Ittai the Gittite caught his eye. David couldn't understand why this newly arrived foreigner took the risk of such open loyalty to David. Return and remain with the king. In calling Absalom the king, David showed that he would not cling to the throne. At that moment, it seemed that Absalom would succeed, so David called him the king and left it unto the Lord. As my lord the king lives, Ittai meant David, not Absalom. David told Ittai, remain with the king. Ittai answered back, that's exactly what I intend to do, and you are the king. Whatever place my lord the king shall be, whether in death or life, even there also your servant will be. Ittai was loyal to David when it looked certain that it would cost him something. True loyalty isn't demonstrated until it is likely to cost something to be loyal. Remember, the more rebels there are, the more need for us to be conspicuously loyal to our king, from McLaren. We learn a lot from Ittai's demonstration of loyalty. Ittai remained loyal when David was down. He did so decisively, voluntarily, despite having newly come to David. He did it publicly, and he did it knowing that the fate of David became his fate. If Ittai, charmed with David's person and character, though a foreigner, and a stranger, felt that he could enlist beneath his banner for life, yea, and declared that he would do so there, and then how much more so may you and I, if we know what Christ has done for us, and who he is, and what he deserves at our hands, at this good hour, plight our troth to him, and vow, as the Lord lives, surely in whatsoever place my Lord and Savior shall be, whether in death or life, even there also shall his servant be. From Spurgeon. Yeah. We should have even more loyalty to Christ than Ittai had to David. We must determine that wherever Jesus is, we will be also. He lives in the heavenlies, so will we be. He is with his church, so will we be. He is busy in his work, so will we be. He is with children, so will we be. Toward the way of the wilderness. Many years before, David left the safety of Saul's palace to live as a fugitive. Those years in the wilderness prepared David to be king. God sent David out into the wilderness to continue the same work in his life. From Spurgeon, we do not like going over Kedron. When it comes to the pinch, how we struggle against suffering, and especially against dishonor and slander. How many there were who would have gone on pilgrimage, but that Mr. Shame proved too much for them. They could not bear to go over the black brook Kedron, could not endure to be made nothing for the sake of the Lord of glory, but they even turned back. Yeah. It's interesting. You see, when justice isn't done, how it leads to such trouble later on in David's life here. This sin that David committed with Bathsheba and subsequent murder of Uriah, it's led to this. So it's important for justice to be done, and not just for wrongs to be overlooked, and especially not for us to selfishly, indulgently give ourselves over to sin. It can lead to far-reaching consequences. Anyhow, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day. Bye.